So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks very much for joining. Today we're going to be hearing from Adrian. His talk will be about 20 minutes, and then there'll be time for discussions and questions afterwards. Please keep yourself muted during the talk, but you can post questions in the chat if you like. I have to let you know we're recording the session, and it will be available on YouTube to watch back afterwards if you like. So yeah, with that, let me introduce Adrian. He studied math and computer science at Ecole Polytechnique, and then completed a master's in computer science at EPFL. After that, he came to ENS, so Ecole Normale Supérieure in Paris, for a PhD in computational neuroscience. And his PhD, as he'll tell us, focused on low-rank recurrent neural networks. So yeah, with that, over to Adrian.
Thank you, Marcus. So hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So just to finish the presentation, I just finished my PhD recently in the laboratory of Adrian Ostojic at ENS. And I'm, for the moment, staying a few more months as a postdoc there and still looking for opportunities for afterwards. Okay, so today I wanted to present the last of the works I did during my PhD, which is this collaboration with Jonathan Pillow from Princeton about extracting computational mechanisms from neural data using low-rank RNNs. And you can read the papers that's been published at the NeurIPS conference. Basically, to introduce the subject, I want to start from the point of view that there are two big traditions in systems neuroscience that are often considered separately. So one first big tradition is that of defining latent variable models for neural data. So basically, the brain is supposed to be an organ that generates activity based on stimuli, and from this activity, behavior is generated. So supposedly, both stimuli and behavior are encoded in the internal state of the brain. And there's also some intermediate computational steps that should be encoded there. So how to decode all these variables from brain activity is one of the big problems in systems neuroscience. And there's a variety of statistical methods that aim at so finding some latent variables hidden inside this activity, and hence trying to infer all the computational process from stimuli to behavior. And yeah, broadly, we can say these methods, these statistical methods can be either passive, so they just try to find, for example, some low-dimensional spaces in the neural state space that encode relevant variables. That can be PCA, targeted dimensionality reduction, its variance, Gaussian process factor analysis, etc. And some of these methods are purely active in the sense that they actually try to build a generative process for the same kind of trajectories in the neural state space, while reducing it to a more interpretable space of also latent variables. And so typically they'll try to build dynamical systems from the neural activity. And we've seen a lot of that recently, in particular with works from people like Scott Linderman, Chetan Pandarinath, and many others. So this is one first tradition. Another very, very broad tradition in systems neuroscience is to consider models that are not phenomenological, but more mechanistic, and trying to combine some principles of how neurons interact with each other, and in order to simulate how they would process stimuli and generate activities that resemble those that we observe in recordings, and ultimately generate desired behavior. So these mechanistic network models, so they can often be, for example, recurrent networks, but also feed-forward networks. They can be handcrafted. This is an example from a famous paper by Xiaojin Wang, or a very common strategy right now with the development of good optimization algorithms is to simply define some task constraints, so some computations that we wish the model to be doing, and then optimize it in a black box manner. So automatically the optimization process will find the good connection weights between neurons so that the network does the task that we want it to see doing. So these two traditions seem to answer different styles of questions. The first one leads to very interpretable models of neural activity, but it's abstracted away in a sense from biology and stays at a more phenomenological level. while recurrent neural networks, they are either handcrafted and tedious to work out, or they are optimized in a black box manner, which makes them hard to interpret in a way. But on the other hand, they are mechanistically neuronal, so they reproduce the mechanisms that at least at some level that we see the neurons developing. In this talk, I want to talk about approaches to reconcile these two approaches. And in particular, I will draw from a lot of inspiration from a work that was published by Francesca Mastrogiuseppe and Adrian Ostojic in 2018, where they considered recurrent neural network models with low-rank connectivity. So here I'll start from a description of an RNN. So here it's a rate model. We'll see that there are also interesting extensions for spiking networks, which is just defined by this differential equation. So with J being the connectivity matrix, which contains one weight for each pair of neurons. So J in general is a very complex matrix, and by optimizing it, we can make a network do virtually any task. And in this paper, the authors considered connectivity matrices that were instead constrained to have a low rank decomposition. So these do not cover the set of all possible connectivity matrices, only a subset of those. And they turn out to be particularly interesting for several reasons. And most particularly, so it's been developed in a series of papers, and also other groups have worked on these ideas. It's an interesting property of RNNs with low rank connectivity is that the activity of the network is then constrained to a low dimensional subspace of the neural state space. So in particular, each mode, each rank one mode of the decomposition of the connectivity matrix adds one dimension onto which the neural activity can go. And each of the external inputs also drives the neural activity in one other direction of the state space specified by the input vectors. So in the end, in a low-rank RNN model, the dimensionality of the neural trajectories is constrained to a subspace whose dimensionality is equal to the rank of the matrix plus the number of inputs. So very naturally, these low-rank RNNs, they lead to activity that spans a specific subspace. And that's very reminiscent of the latent variable models that try to infer such subspaces from recordings. So I'm gonna cover this later. Seeing this first project that we did and that was published in Neural Computation in September, also based on an idea from Jonathan Pillow and with Adrian Ostojic, is that there is probably a link between latent dynamical systems and low-rank RNNs. And we actually worked out mathematically what this link looks like exactly in the case of linear dynamics. So linear latent dynamical systems versus linear low-rank RNNs. And it turned out from our analysis that these two systems are not exactly equivalent because they treat stochasticity in a different way. But when the number of neurons becomes sufficiently large, these two models become exactly equivalent. So there is an equivalence mathematically, at least for large n, between what would be a latent dynamical system and a low-rank recurrent neural network, except that the second one gives a mechanistic explanation that is plausible in terms of interaction between neurons to generate these low-dimensional trajectories that in the LDS are simply inferred from the trajectories. So drawing from this analogy and trying to push it further, we developed a second project where we aim at this time trying to exploit low-rank RNNs to see what information we can gain from neural recordings, so from the trajectories of neurons. So the idea in this project was that we have a bunch of neural data, so the trajectories of individual neurons when responding to stimuli. These can be derived from either a black box RNN that one would like to understand or from simply a recording in vivo. And the idea is to try to fit low-rank networks to reproduce these trajectories as well as possible while keeping the rank as low as possible. And from this, we would then be able to derive a generative model of the dynamics of these trajectories in a low-dimensional space. So like a latent dynamical system would do. But at the same time, we're having an effective connectivity for a network that reproduces these trajectories and such that can derive a mechanism at the neuronal level. So first, I will talk now about application of these to a full-rank RNN, and I will show how completely black box RNN, which is using an obscure mechanism to do a task, can be dissected with this method. And then I will show an application to a neural recording in macaques. So first, let me present this project on this task. So we will focus here on the context-dependent decision-making task that was presented in the paper by Valerio Mant and David Susilo in 2013. Here I will consider an abstraction of this task where a network receives two signals. They are noisy signals, either positive or negative, and two contextual cues. In every trial, one of the two contextual cues is active, and so the network has to integrate the corresponding input while ignoring completely the evidence from the other input. So this is a task that has received a lot of attention, in particular last year from a large amount of papers. And we have also proposed a mechanism for it with Alexis Dubreuil implemented in a rank 1 network. So we have shown that the rank 1 network can do it, and we have shown how it can do it. But now this was limited to an analysis which was on a rank 1 network. So it does not answer how a general network trained without constraints could perform this task. So here in this project, I take a full rank network that is trained to do the task. So the weights are optimized in a black box manner. And now to interpret it, I will take all the neural trajectories from neurons in response to different trials in this task. And I will try to fit a low rank network to reproduce those trajectories. And we'll try to consider a variety of ranks and see how well it approximates the trajectories of the original full rank network. So first, one obvious thing that one can think of when we try to reproduce, to simplify this connectivity of the full rank would be, why not doing an SVD or a diagonalization of the full rank matrix and truncate it at the desired rank, right? So this is something that's been tried already in the literature. For example, you can see the papers of Friedrich Schüssler or Renate Krause. It turns out that it often does not work very well. And here we can see examples here with the gray lines. Every line corresponds to a different initialization of the full rank. We need to go at least to a rank 5 to see truncations of the original full rank connectivity do the task well. And this depends hugely on the initialization. Actually, there are different training regimes that depend on hyperparameters and how the network is trained or initialized. And for some of these training regimes, truncating the connectivity of the full rank simply does never lead to trajectories that reproduce what's going on in the network. So instead, what we can do is what was proposed in our project. So to train networks of decreasing ranks to reproduce the activities of these neural trajectories. And there, by huge contrast, we see that going as low as to a rank 1, the low rank networks are able to reproduce very accurately the trajectories of the full rank. So it's like there is some property of the full rank trajectories that is very low dimensional and can be accurately captured by a low rank RNN. But in the original train connectivity, this feature was probably way too intermingled with other random properties of the connectivity, and so it was hard to extract only by SVD or a related technique. But here, via optimization, it is possible to retrieve such simple networks that reproduce the trajectories. So I just want to mention that for this task, it is rank 1. Obviously, it is not always going to be as simple. And just we have other examples in the paper of other tasks where the ranks that are needed are higher. And here, for example, when training a full rank network to do a delayed match to sample task, when we try to reproduce the trajectories of the full rank network, we need to go to a rank 2 or sometimes to a rank 3. So there are probably different implementations in the unconstrained networks. But so yeah, the rank that is needed to reproduce the trajectories, of course, depends on the computational requirements of the task. Okay, so now why is it interesting to have a rank 1 network that reproduces the trajectories? So again, for two reasons. The first is that this will give us a latent space of the neural activity. And this is what I'm showing here. We obtained a latent space of the trajectories of the original full rank network only by looking at the connectivity of the inferred network. And actually only by looking at a few axes of this connectivity. So here what I'm showing are projections on the inputs. So the inputs are the vectors that feed external signals to the network, and the M vector, which is one of the vectors that defines the rank 1 connectivity, and that actually corresponds to where the choice of the decision-making process is encoded. And here we see in dotted lines the inferred rank 1 model, and in full lines the original full rank model. And we see that the inferred trajectories match very well the full rank trajectories. And actually, if we try to relate these axes to what another method, for example, targeted dimensionality reduction would find, we see that there is a lot of overlap with the TDR axis, except that here, so TDR was a passive method, so it could not generate trials or trajectories, new novel trajectories, or be predictive of the activity. Here, we have a generative model of the dynamics of the network. And we can see that, for example, the choice axis is generated by the recurrent connectivity in a certain way. Right, so this is one first aspect that we have with these low rank networks. So we have these connectivity axes that explain neural geometry. And I just want to say that since this is also a seminar related to spiking networks, in the lab, some people have extended this theory of low rank connectivity relating to neural geometry for the case of spiking networks, where it works very similarly with, of course, some technical details that change. And in particular, Lyubitsa Chimeza has published on bioRxiv a preprint showing how it works for a very similar perceptual decision-making task. All right, so closing this parenthesis, so we have this relation between geometry and connectivity, but we have something more with the low rank network, is that we have the contributions of every neuron to each of the connectivity axes. And in particular, what we see for this context-dependent task is that, curiously, a lot of neurons seem to be aligned to the axes that correspond here to the contextual inputs of the network. So there seems to be a population of neurons that are very much aligned to the contextual input A, and the population of neurons that is very aligned to the contextual input B. And these all have different contributions also to the other connectivity axes. And it turns out that they are also differently gain modulated, so meaning they will be in different positions with respect to the neural transfer function in each context. So in particular, the green population is saturated in context A, the purple population is saturated in context B. And it turns out that this explains how these populations play a differential role only in one of the two contexts. So actually, here the green population that is saturated in context A is the one that plays a role for integrating context for doing the task in context B. And we can see it if we simply turn off the green neurons, the performance will decrease in the task of context B, but be virtually unharmed in the task of context A. And inversely, if we harm the neurons of the purple population, it will harm the performance only in context A and not in the other context. So that's all for the rank 1 network, right? That's an analysis that is done only on the network that has been inferred on the trajectories. Now, so the question is whether this mechanism that we do on an inferred network explains something about the original full rank network, right? And it's harder to identify these populations in the original full rank network because we cannot analyze the connectivity as readily, because the connectivity is full rank, so it's much more complex. It cannot be reduced to such a small number of parameters. But what we can do is reproduce the same perturbation experiments. Simply harm the neurons that we have identified as being purple or green in the original network. And what we see is that we obtain exactly the same pattern of performance losses that was characteristic of the populations in the rank 1 network. So showing that the original full rank network also implements its task by having two modules that are responsible each for one of the two contexts. So through this apparently deviated path of inferring a rank 1 connectivity on the trajectories, etc., we eventually obtain information about a mechanism that is hidden inside the connectome of the original network, even though we were not able to analyze this original connectome. Okay, so I just wanted to mention also that inferring low rank networks is something that performs much better in the face of heavy subsampling of neurons than inferring a full rank unconstrained network, because it seems to be less prone to overfitting. It generalizes to higher dimensional tasks, as I mentioned before. And interestingly, I wanted to finish on applications to neural recordings. So we simply used the same neural recordings as those of the Valerio Mant and David Susilo paper. And what we observe is that fitting a full rank network to these recordings, so there is only trial average activity, but fitting a full rank network bears almost no increase of the quality of the fit than fitting a rank 1 network. So fitting a rank 1 network was sufficient to explain a lot of the trajectories that were observed in these recordings. And if we look at the low dimensional projections of this activity, we see that the trajectories, so the axes that are inferred by the rank 1 network capture a lot of the activity of the original recordings, and that the rank 1 model is able to capture a lot of what is going on this subspace. So here again, seeing in full lines the recordings, in dotted lines the rank 1 model that correspond to the monkey data that was shown in the original paper. And again, we can analyze the activity, the connectivity mechanisms here, and it's a little bit more complex. So what I've identified is that everything seems to rely on a subset of the neurons that is quite small. So most of the neurons have small connectivity weights and small impact on what's going on, whereas a minority of the neurons here in orange seem to bear like the biggest weights in connectivity space and have the highest firing rates, and actually inactivating the blue ones doesn't have any effect on the network activity, while inactivating a few of the orange ones already has a huge impact. So the problem with this log normal, so it looks like it's a heavy-tailed or maybe log normal distribution of connectivity weights. The problem with this is that it's harder to identify populations to do clustering accurately with a small number of neurons. But yeah, I'm confident. I'm trying to apply now this data to larger data sets to see what we can observe. I'm quite confident as to the fact that there are differential populations that are there, but I cannot make any very accurate inference with just a few neurons that I will have there for signal. And just to conclude, yeah, there's much to do left here. So this is one method that is in a huge, vast array of methods that exist out there that need to be more accurately captured. And especially there's a huge challenge, of course, in trying to find the hyperparameters that are the most relevant for fitting this data that is actually neural data. So it's spiking with models that will try to reproduce them with different things, for example, transfer functions, which play a huge role here. In particular, it would be interesting to try to see what this transfer function can capture about gain modulations in the original spiking system. And yeah, with this, I just wanted to acknowledge the people who contributed to my thesis and in particular to this project, and thank you for your attention.
Cool.
Okay,
well,
yeah, thank you. It was a little bit over time, but.
No, it's perfect. Thanks so much for that. I saw Max raise his hand. So Max, do you want to come on screen and ask a question? Or?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. I just had a question regarding back on sort of slide 19. So when you were talking about these finding population that handles context A, population that handles context B, it also looks like in the middle if I'm sort of interpreting correctly,
Yeah.
you also have a big blob of neurons that don't seem to particularly lean one way or the other. Did you take a look at those at all in terms of, is it that they're just a pool of neurons that are not really used for the computations at all, or are they neurons that are perhaps doing things that are mutually needed in both sort of contexts, even though I know it's the same task essentially in each context?
No, it's true. So I don't remember exactly for this network, but I've observed both cases actually in my experiments. So some cases where the blob of neurons in the middle doesn't contribute much, and some cases where there are actually three populations. So two of which are responsible for gating the context information, and a third one which is responsible for the internal feedback loop that actually performs the integration. So the two solutions exist. I found them in my experiments. I don't remember which one this one is, but yeah, it's an interesting question indeed.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jake had a question as well.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for the talk. I think these methods are really, really important for the field. Yeah, my main question is, when you showed these early results, when you train full rank networks with, for example, really large weight initialization, I think is that called the lazy regime? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Then I guess if you're using like a sigmoid transfer function, I would expect these dynamics to be pretty chaotic and very high dimensional. So I'm wondering, how come you can fit those dynamics with a low rank network? What's going on there? Like, when you train the network, do you have like some regularization, which then reduces the dimensionality over time, over training? Because I guess initially before training, it should be really high, a really high dimensional system, no?
No, it's a good question. I think it depends on the strength of the inputs. So, you know, there's this famous paper, Rajan about it all about, so when you have these chaotic dynamics and you have strong inputs, it actually cancels the chaotic dynamics. I think it's what happens here, that the inputs are strong enough to focus on the task and so cancel the chaotic dynamics. But for sure, if I would, for example, fit low rank here to the network with less strong inputs or just spontaneous activity, it would not work at all. I would expect it not to work at all. But yeah, also this is why maybe truncation doesn't work, I guess.
Yep.
But yeah, for the task related, at least it seems to work here.
And do you use regularization when you train these networks?
Sorry, yeah, I don't. No. So the concept, as I see it, is that the rank constraint acts as a natural regularizer already. It doesn't need to be regularized further in terms of the weights.
I actually wanted to follow up a bit on that and just ask, like, practically, how easy is it to train these low rank networks? And like, what is the sort of procedure? How do you do it?
It's longer than to train a full rank network. So convergence is slower, for sure. And yeah, I didn't see that it was there's no major hassle, except that it's a little bit longer and more difficult to find signal there. But just one point is that it's easy also to do some form of curriculum there. So in particular, even though truncating the original network doesn't work by itself, initializing a low rank network with a truncated full rank that was pre-trained helps for some tasks. But it's definitely something that is more difficult to train these networks in general on tasks or on data when they are low rank.
Okay, cool, thanks. And then I think the other thing I kind of wanted to ask, which I think you had a quick slide on, was about applying this to more complex tasks. So I think for now you've sort of focused on like neuroscience-y tasks, which is good because that's what we have data for and it's what everyone does. Like, we also do the same. But I was just trying to think about how some of this would scale, or what would be different if you tried to do something like, I don't know, ImageNet, or like, you know, really, I guess, more complicated tasks, basically.
No, yeah, this is also this is also a neuroscience task. This is also something I'd love to explore. So I know the pruning communities in deep learning, in pure deep learning, they like to focus on two things: so sparsity and, on the other hand, sometimes having low rank factorizations of the layers. So it seems to work to some extent. And yeah, something I would love to explore more, because here it's pretty apparent from the populations that there can be a certain amount of pruning, and on the other hand, low rank factorizations. So yeah, this is something I'd love to explore on transformers or on more complex networks. And if anyone wants to do this in collaboration for a future postdoc, I'd be definitely up to it. Just let me know. Yeah.
Cool. I guess, do you think that might be quite computationally challenged, like demanding, if it's difficult to train them, or
I think
solvable?
I think training is not the problem. So the thing is that very quickly you scale up to higher ranks. So this is some tasks I've made on memorization, or quickly you scale up to rank 5, 6, 7, etc. And there, like, in just interpretation becomes probably more difficult. So I think you need to be smart about the tasks that you're considering and how to decompose complexity into simple bricks. Yeah.
I think Max, thanks. I think Max had another question, so feel free to just jump in, by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry,
thanks. I was just curious. So once you've fitted one of these low rank RNNs to the trajectories of a high rank RNN, if you then go about training that low rank RNN on sort of further tasks, do you find it drops back out of being low rank again, or does it sort of stay low rank, if that makes sense, in terms of the connectivity matrix?
So if you train, so okay, which one do you want to train on other tasks? The
low rank. So I might be misinterpreting this, but you have your 4 rank RNN, you train it on a task, you fit the low rank to the dynamics of the neural trajectories of the full rank. But then afterwards, if you wanted to continue training your low rank on new task outputs, is that something you can do?
But of the same task, or
let's say for now, same task, or maybe like close. And one of the things I was wondering, I guess, is there like a benefit to having low rank connectivity in terms of generalization or like other features? But that would require you to be able to train the low rank RNN on like additional variations of the task, right?
So yeah, I think so. Once you get out of distribution, so out of the distribution that you've studied in the initial setting, the full rank can have quite unpredictable behavior, which I think is normal. It depends also on the training regime. So this is something that Timo has looked at, also generalizability. But so depending on the training regime and the initialization, one can expect networks to be more unpredictable or more generalizable in certain ways when faced with out of distribution task examples. And so the advantage with the low rank RNN, and I didn't touch upon this, but one can write entirely the equations of the dynamics for this low rank RNN. So one can simply predict from looking at the dynamics normally what will happen with other examples. It does not mean, I mean, thing with generalizability is that I often fail to see it defined in a consistent enough manner to be used in a very general setting. But I think for most of the cases that people would consider generalizable, low rank is pretty much more consistently generalizable. And yeah, there's a neuron paper, I think, going out this week or next week by Manuel Beiran, which will be exactly about this thing. So about how low rank networks can generalize in a more consistent manner because they simply have more predictable dynamics. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, that does. Yeah, awesome. I'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Well, does anyone else have any more questions?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much again. I mean, it was great occasion to be talking about it.
No, thanks so much for agreeing to it. I think, yeah, lots to think about, and I'm looking forward to seeing that paper as well. So.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Maybe looking forward to meet some of you in conferences next, and yeah, don't hesitate to talk to me if you know of postdoc opportunities resembling that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
well,
could you give the name one
Oh,
more
sorry.
time for the new paper, the paper coming out on the generalizability?
Yeah, it's the name is Beiran, so it's already a preprint. It's Beiran and Ostojic. Maybe I'll
Fantastic.
just write it in the chat.
Thank you.